Welcome back to the Trending Communicator. I'm your host, Dan Nestle. Not too long ago, I was at one of those executive team meetings that so many of us dread. The kind where we had to make some hard decisions. One of those course correction, trade-offs, everyone do their part meetings, where going into it that when all is said and done, people, friends, teammates, direct reports, are going to lose their jobs. And as the comms guy, I knew it would fall on me and my team to figure out how to deliver the bad news to our employees. So when I chimed in and I asked a few questions to help me formulate the messaging, FAQs and such, one of the execs stopped me and just said, "Can you spin this somehow?" Of course, I politely declined, and I talked about things like ethics and transparency. Maybe I referred to pigs and lipstick and turd polishing. And then I went ahead and did my job properly. I bring this up because that word, spin, has done incredible damage to the reputation and perception of PR and comms. And as much as we've moved on, clearly some people never got the memo. Spin truly sucks. And there are few people in our profession who have done more to distance us from spin than my guest today. The founder and creator behind spinsucks.com. A decade ago, in her book entitled Spin Sucks, she laid out a manual for honest, responsible, and ethical communications and introduced the PR world to my very favorite and most indispensable tool for strategic communications, the PESO, P-E-S-O model. Since then, she's expanded on the model, created PESO courses and resources to implement the model, and has continued blogging on spinsucks.com, staying on top of the developments in comms and marketing, especially advances in technology and AI, and evolving the model along the way. She's a prolific public speaker, author of 2 books, undisputed PR thought leader, podcaster, and CEO of her own agency, Gini Dietrich. Get ready to get into PESO, AI, and more with my friend and PR legend, Gini Dietrich.
Wow, it was quite the intro. Holy smokes. Wow.
Well, normally, I was just thinking about it, and we're going to be talking about AI. We're going to be talking about PESO. We're going to be talking about things that are really germane to, people who are listening to this show and interesting to people who aren't necessarily PR professionals, but, maybe marketers, maybe people who are just looking for different ways to consider their program and to consider how they talk to people. But when it comes down to it, I thought about this concept of spin and what you've done to kind of dismiss it and to change the narrative, and how even the PESO model, everything is a way of combating that, from the perspective of communications is a serious business. It's measurable. It's strategic. There's no need to even think about spin.
Right.
You don't have to make shit up when you know that if you just have the messaging right and you have strategy right and you can hit your different channels, understand you're paid, you're earned, you're shared, you're owned. That's the PESO. Then there's no room for spin. But anyway, that whole thing inspired me about I figured I'd back into it with a little story, but it's good to see you, Gini.
Good to see you too, Dan.
Yeah,
it's funny you say that, because I think we're in a world now where we live in what has been dubbed the post-truth America, which sucks in and of itself. But as communicators, we have to kind of figure out how to navigate that. And part of that is you can't spin, you can't lie, you can't be unethical. You have to be extraordinarily transparent and authentic. And we're having to reach people where they are. It used to be that we could reach people at the 6 o'clock news because everybody sat down, watched the news, had their dinner, and then went about their night. Nobody does that anymore, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you have all these disparate media bubbles that we have to look at, and people can spot the spin. They can spot the lies. They can spot it, in this world of misinformation and mis and mal and disinformation. It's all this stuff that's going on around our worlds. And our job is to maintain the trust and the authority and the authenticity.
It's interesting how there's been such a upswell in discussions of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, information, any of the informations. So much so that, I firmly believe that even the term misinformation is a kind of misinformation sometimes. It's just these are heavy-handed tools. Language is a heavy-handed tool, and when it's overused and over-deployed, we blunt the edges too much. And I think that's sometimes the case with misinformation. And it's almost like, the boy who cried wolf, where we have so many people crying misinformation. Oftentimes they're absolutely right. It is misinformation. It is,
sure,
or worse, disinformation.
Yep.
But I think we have to really be much more careful moving forward as a profession. Certainly as a society, it's harder to do the society thing, but at least as a profession, and being very kind of, diligent about what we're labeling things, and who is the arbiter of the truth, who is the arbiter of fact. There shouldn't be any arbiters of fact, by the way. Facts are facts.
Correct.
But
yes, unfortunately, that's not the world we live in.
Yeah, but if there's an interpretation, then just there's got to be some way. Look, label it as such. I know that some people try, but sometimes what has been decried as misinformation turns out to be totally true later, or what is said to be true turns out to be like disinformation later. Like it's just a mess. So we need to really be able to not only stand by what we say is misinformation or have rationale for it, but if it turns out that we were wrong, we have to come out and say we were wrong.
Right. Yes,
that's the worst, when there's like some denial. And
it's crisis communications 101.
Yeah, it's funny. You wrote about this.
Wrong.
You wrote about this today, didn't you? This was like your blog post today was about misinformation. It was the one that was published today.
I lose track.
No, it's the one that was published today, I think. But because you are prolific, and you write all the time. And I love your writing style, by the way. I should say that. And then I at the end we'll give all the links to people. But I mean, we wanted to talk about PESO, and we could start with misinformation stuff. PESO model is like it's not the one size fits all for everything, because it's a strategic tool, but it can help everybody, I think, combat all of these problems and approach all these problems. So why don't we kind of back up a little bit? And first of all, I introduced you. I think a lot of people listening just know who you are, but maybe quick top line, who is Gini? And let's talk about PESO. So, give us the scoop.
I mean, you already did say who I am. So I run an agency. I have all these SpinSucks properties. But yeah, I mean, you raised the point that the PESO model was outlined and introduced 10 years ago when SpinSucks, the book, was published. And I'm working on the second edition right now, which I'm very comfortable saying because I'm almost halfway finished with it. So I can actually say that I am working on it. And in the first edition, it was mentioned, and it was sort of, this is how I see the future going, but it wasn't fully baked. And in the second edition, it will be very much the book is led by PESO. Because a couple of things. Number one is, what I have found is there's lots and lots and lots of misconceptions. And part of that is my fault because, like I said, I published this book and it wasn't fully baked. And also it was 10 years ago, right? So think about what has changed in the last 10 years.
Just a few things.
In our careers. I mean, it's insane what has changed and going to change with AI. And so people tend to look at PESO and go, oh, okay, well, I've got some social media advertising. I'm doing some media relations. I've got some blogging, and we're sharing it on LinkedIn and TikTok. So I've done the PESO model. That's not it. It's not a list of tactics. You can't just pull tactics from each media type and call it the PESO model. It's really about an integrated model that's measurable. And it's measurable to the things that executives care about. I think our industry overall tends to measure outputs instead of outcomes. So we measure activities instead of real tangible results. And part of that's because there isn't a uniform way for us to do it like there are in the other industries, in our marketing and advertising, for instance. But also it's hard. It's hard to measure. It's hard to say, well, we did this and it translated to this, because there's so many different points on the customer journey. But we have to do a better job of that. And the PESO model, when you integrate it correctly, instead of just using a list of tactics, does help you do that.
Can you run through each of the elements of the PESO model for our listeners. Like there will be quite a few people who know it, but many more who don't. And I think everybody needs to. So
Sure.
if you can.
Yeah.
Off with the P.
It's ingrained, ingrained right here. So P is paid. And, we're not talking about doing Super Bowl ads and billboards and things like that. We're talking about what you and I know as advertorials from when we began our career. It's really good content that you might pay to place, or you've boosted it. It might be your earned coverage that you're boosting on social media or through Google Ads. It's the white paper or the ebook that you created that you are using ads to promote to get people to download it. It's the webinar that you're using ads to promote to get people to attend. So that's the paid media I talk about. It's the kinds of things that as communicators, we can, for lack of a better term, control. Then you have E, which is earned. And, in the beginning, earned media was very much media relations. It was broadcast, it was trade, it was print, newspapers, magazines. And today it is expanded. I think it was in March or May, one of the M months, that Axios came out and said there are 12 disparate media bubbles. And you have to think about where your audience is. So they might be on TikTok. They might be watching the evening news. They might still get the New York Times hard copy, or they might be getting their news on Facebook. Like you have to figure out where they're getting it. They might be getting it from right-wing media. They might be getting it from left-wing media. You have to understand where your audiences are and then go there. So it's less about media relations and more about influencers. It's really about the third-party credibility. So how could you gain third-party credibility? And in some cases, that might be reviews. It might be comments. It might be community engagement. It's other people giving you the credibility that you need. So you're earning that trust, right? And then S is shared. And really shared is social media. It's community. It's the private socials. So you have like Discord, you have Signal, you have Slack, you have Teams, all of the places that you can distribute, Blue Sky, Threads, all the places. And then owned is content. So content really from the perspective of you are creating content that lives on something that you own. So where people get confused is they might have a LinkedIn newsletter. That's not owned content. That's shared content because it's on LinkedIn. If you have it on your website and then you're repurposing it to LinkedIn, that's owned because you're renting it to LinkedIn. But owned is the content that lives on something that you have control over. So it's not renting it out to the social media networks. And then when you bring it all together, you have community, you have pay for play, you have lead generation, you have search engine optimization, and then you have the ultimate experience, expertise, authority, and trust.
Experience, expertise, authority, trust.
Yep.
And that is EATS, right?
That is EAT.
Authority, trust.
Or as I like to say, eat. Eat.
So that is a big meal,
Yeah, it is.
And that's a newer addition to the model, the EAT.
It is. I can't remember when. It's been probably about a year that Google came out and said, listen, we're going with generative AI, we're going to serve up content that demonstrates that you have your experience and your expertise. So lots of people are using AI to create content. My favorite thing in the whole wide world is when I get my media monitoring report and it's like, so-and-so mentioned Spin Sucks or mentioned you. And I go and I look and it's like, in today's challenging landscape. And you're like, oh, come on. You can't even change the intro. Like everybody knows that's how AI starts.
Let's delve into the world of...
Right.
I have instructed all of my AI to not use the word delve. And, it's only a short workaround because it's only a matter of time before they start saying explore too much. And that becomes a bad word.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy. But this is so thank you for laying out the model, right? So patterns. Everybody has a different, strict strategy, business strategy that they have to support, or different executives they need to support. And, so when you look at the four, I don't know, I'm going to call them quadrants for lack of a better word, but they're not really quadrants because they're connected and they're overlapping. But it seems like there's no, it's not to scale. Like, in other words, like the P can be really, really tiny sometimes.
Yeah.
Where the E is really large. But it seems to me also that the E is usually pretty big. So is there a way to visualize that? Or is it, like, what do you think in general?
It depends. One of the questions I get is, do you have to balance out budget and resources for each media type? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah.
It does depend on your goals. Like, we have one client that I would say owned is probably 70%, paid is 20%, shared is 15%, and earned is only 5%.
Yeah.
So it just depends. It depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And it will change too as you grow and as it evolves and as your programs evolve, that will change as well. You might put more into earned and less into paid.
I've used it in so many ways over time. And, frankly, I was using it before I knew what it was called and before I knew it belonged to you. Because clearly some folks have been marching around with variations of the PESO model. And
there's one that's calling it pose. I'm like, you can't do that.
I've heard different variations, and for our listeners' benefit and for our and maybe as a warning, if you use the PESO model or any derivative thereof, Gini owns that. Just remember that.
Yeah, you'll get a letter from my attorney.
You'll get a letter, rightly so. Because it's a really it's a really incredible piece of IP. What I was going to say though is I find it very useful as a validator. Almost sometimes after the fact, once you're running a comms team or you're kind of looking at a broad horizon of or all the different activities and different kind of strategies that are available to you to achieve the mission of your organization, your client, whoever you're representing yourself, then like lay the PESO model over it and see what you're missing.
Love that.
It's kind of a useful thing. Have I done these different things and have I done these different things? Oh, there's no. Am I really downplaying shared here?
Yeah.
But to that, actually, now I mentioned shared, I think some people might have questions about the kind of difference between like shared and earned in a lot of ways. It seems like when somebody shares something on your behalf, does that now count as earned? Or are you talking about shared as the platform itself by placing something in a shared media, a social media, or a Discord or something like this, where a messaging platform or something like that? Does that now become shared, or both, or all of the above?
I mean, you could argue semantics for sure. And if you wanted to count it as shared, you probably could. I think it would probably get too unruly to be able to do that. Because how many retweets and reposts and things like that can you get? Like it could get really unruly. So it's, if you think about the outcome of each, so the outcome of paid media is to grow your reach. The outcome of earned is to earn that credibility, to get that third-party validation. The outcome of shared is to distribute to existing audiences and build community and engagement and brand ambassadors, brand loyalists. And then the outcome of owned is storytelling. It's how do you best tell your story? So, and your messaging and consistency and all those kinds of things. So if you think about it from an outcome perspective, sure, you could argue the semantics. And if you wanted to call that earned, you probably could. But I would rather see PR professionals really focus on the outcomes, the measurable outcomes, than try to say, well, we got engagement and reach, and because of that, we've earned it.
It's well, I mean, if you give PR professionals like various ways to do something, they're going to do something in various ways. I mean, that's just the way of things. Whatever actually is most convincing to the CEO or to their client at the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. You mentioned something though there that that really kind of is not only intriguing, but I hear a lot lately is just the word community, right? And shared as a sort of function of shared a function of community, or is shared and shared within the model is community part of shared? I don't know. But where I was going with this is that community itself, those are now kind of audience groups, right? A community is there's different audience groups, and approaching a community within the community itself, you could be aiming for earned within the community.
Sure.
Right. Or you could be some communities you could even do paid within a community. Right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yep.
So it's like you can keep replicating PESO like ad infinitum in meta ways. It's interesting.
Well, and that's the value of it, of the integration. That's why it's less about the tactics and more about how you bring this all together. Right. So a really good example of that is we have a client that it is launching a campaign, and they did a really great job of earned media at a local level with local broadcast. That was it. There wasn't any content development. There wasn't any shared social media content, which means there wasn't any ability to use any paid. They just did the media relations, and I was like, no. You had this, and they were there on the ground with the news stations, and you just had this huge opportunity to do all this other stuff and didn't. So that's what I really want people to think about when they're doing PESO is, how do we extend what we're already doing? How do we repurpose it in ways that we don't have to add more on? We don't have to add budget. We don't have to have resources. We just do more.
You're circling kind of around this point, or at this point, that I did want to explore more with you in the earn side of things. And now why not now? There's this, that's a great example of, somebody going for the media and taking the, like traditional media relations, getting the coverage and taking that as the win. And sure, there are situations where it would be a big win in and of itself.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. But the way that we approach media relations these days, and, we've talked about this a little bit, and I know you've written about this and I've written about it, but the way we approach media relations these days, it seems to be, let's just say old. It seems to be a sort of obsolete approach in that just like I said before, you're looking at the activity versus the results. And, just by virtue of getting a media hit in the tier of your choice, suddenly you feel like you've done your job. Right. Now, if you overlay PESO on top of that, you know that you're missing a lot.
Yep.
But the nature of earned media itself, going for these media hits that are, in that example you gave, just by definition fleeting. They disappear after a couple of days. There's no knock-on effect. Rarely, unless it's a bad thing, in which case it'll linger forever. But generally speaking, media is one hit, move on, and has very questionable results about your reputation, brand, et cetera. So how do you think the nature of, in the earned kind of category of PESO, especially, if you think of it in that way, how has that changed? And how is it changing? And, what's wrong with media relations as we know it? That's a lot to talk about, but, take it from any angle you wish, Gini, because I have a soapbox on this too. So,
we do a lot of work with universities and through our certification. And one of the things that I've noticed in the last 5 years is that when you talk to college students about media relations or earned media, the first place they go is not traditional media, ever. I've never in the last 5 years had a student say, oh, well, yeah, let's go to Good Morning America, ever. And so that in of itself is shifting. You layer on the fact that media is not trusted. I think we've seen that we are just coming out of the election. I think we all agree that media is not the media that it was when we were starting our careers.
Yeah, Gallup had that poll before the election that media trust was at like 31%, lower than Congress. and
Lower than Congress.
Lower than Congress. And Edelman Trust Barometer is always saying how showing the decline in trust in media. I would venture that here we are at the time of this recording. We're basically roughly 2 weeks after the election, not quite, but I would venture to say that number is probably down to 15 now. Like it may be worse. Like it is an institution that is crumbling, and traditional. And I'm talking about traditional media. So anyway, and that just colors this whole kind of landscape that we live in.
Right. And then think about how you get your information. I mean, unless you're 80 years old or older, you're not getting information or your news from TV anymore. You're just not. Yeah. There are lots of, and because of what I do for a living, I will go the extra step, but there are lots of times where I'll see something on TikTok or on Facebook or on Instagram and think, well, that's interesting. And then I go do my due diligence to see if it's factual and, all those kinds of things. But that, things are introduced to me in the first place there. And then secondly, just by swiping my phone over to the right to see what news is being delivered to me via my Apple News app, right? So it's completely changed. And I started to realize this probably 3 years ago. I was sitting in the chair getting my hair cut, and my hairdresser is about 15 years younger than I am. And she was like, yeah, so on TikTok, I found this. And then I went down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, wait a second. You're getting all of your information from TikTok? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
But that's where we are, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's less about the traditional media, I think, today.
And, people talk about the evils of TikTok and the evils of Facebook and whatever.
I love TikTok.
I'm sure that I heard that, and which means everybody's going to hear that. I can honestly say that the adventures I've had on TikTok were like straight into the vein, dopamine.
Oh, for sure.
Loved it so much so that I deleted it. Yeah, I right. I mean, but to be completely transparent, I deleted TikTok roughly October 15th ish of 2023 after the October 7th attacks in Israel, and I saw what was happening there. I'm like, this is horrifying.
This is not,
it's just a cesspool. So it's just wrong, and people are getting those bite-sized bits of information.
Yeah,
that it's dangerous, but it's also if you're not looking at that, if you're there to kind of get, I suppose, makeup tips like my daughter does, or to listen to music, it's amazing.
The animal videos, freaking love them.
Yeah. I mean, I saw this great meme a while back, and I'm sure other people have, which is that I don't use TikTok. I use Instagram Reels like a grown up, right? But that's it's a very similar. The algorithm is very different, but it's a similar kind of doom scrolling,
absolutely.
Thing.
Yep.
But but your point is back to your point though, like you're reaching customers or audiences where they are has changed dramatically. So you're saying, so you're saying that they're not even thinking about
it,
the TV or traditional. Yeah. I mean,
I come from a big agency background. One of the first things we always did when we were doing a new campaign was, how do we get the Today Show? What kind of stunt do we need to do to get the Good Morning America? They don't even think about that.
No.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. And that's a lesson, I hope, that's learned in the election, but also across all facets of our socioeconomic life. Big successes are no longer dictated by a small number of mouthpieces.
That's right.
And certain platforms and ways of communicating have absolutely skyrocketed and taken off, right?
Yep.
Like this one, podcast. So like when I do, over the last couple of years, when I was doing, my own PESO thinking under earned, I'd be writing podcast, very big letters, podcast. And I had initially people like, you're crazy. Why do you want to get people on podcasts? Like,
Interesting.
Nobody listens to those things.
No, just 150 million Americans.
I'm like, I'm not talking about I'm not talking about getting somebody on Joe Rogan, although hey, that would be the biggest coup.
Yeah.
But just generally, the wonderful thing about this is, look, nobody is saying that these are journalists unless it's a journalist podcast, right? It's all kind of very free. They all have their own biases and opinions, and they're very clear about it, mostly.
Yep.
So, and they're readily available. They record all the time. There's so many of them. So why not get your people out there?
Right.
And then I said to them, I said to the naysayers, I said, when is the last time you got a media hit that you could repurpose into, 30 different pieces of social media, and, on 15 different channels, and, put it out there a couple months later and make it feel new and, derive your entire CEO's speech from it. When did that happen?
Yeah. Right.
You can do that from a podcast.
Yes.
So the whole landscape has completely changed and earned. And you were saying about, you're saying that whether here and in your writing, that despite that, there's still an important place for media relations. And I've come at this recently from this approach that I'm calling it earned attention.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had thought that I was onto some big thing, and then I realized somebody else invented that, and that's fine. A wonderful marketer, of course, had to come from marketing. Greg. Oh shoot, I forgot his name, but shout out to Greg. Anyway, but I think it's more about attention, like looking at it from where the audiences are, where they're going to reward you with their attention, because attention is gold.
Yep.
A click is not gold. Attention is gold. So fitting that into PESO is now like, that's where my E in PESO is. Okay. It's like earned attention in my head, even though it still says earned media in the law. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually thinking about this last night, and I agree with you. I'm just not going to change it to earned attention, because then it from my perspective, because I'm OCD, it unbalances the model. So then I'd have to change all the other ones.
That's true. Well, what I would posit though is that earned attention is what you're doing. Earned media is what you're getting, maybe. Like maybe earned attention is just a way of thinking about how to achieve their earned media goals. And I think it kind of fits within that somewhere. But hey, we can noodle on that some other time. But I do think that earned media, the whole concept, the whole definition has changed, but it's become so much broader. So, it's elevated in importance. Looking at the rest of the PESO model, the next part of it that I would say is incredibly, if not pivotally or centrally important, is the O, and how, one can't really happen without the other, I don't think, or can't happen well.
Yep.
So you mentioned about, renting versus owning, for people out there. Let's talk a bit about building on owned property versus rented land, and what does that kind of ultimately do for your organization? And because I think this is where we're going to start getting into AI a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, for the most part, I would say almost every program should start with owned, because you're right. If you don't have content, you don't have anything to share, distribute on shared. You don't have anything to prove to an influencer, a journalist, a TikTok news anchor, who you are, how you think, what your executives think, what your subject matter experts can bring to the table. There isn't anything to demonstrate that. And then, of course, you don't have anything to boost, right? You don't have anything to create and put some money behind to grow your audience. So owned is probably the best place to start for most organizations. Now, I will give the caveat that, if you're selling widgets and you need to sell a bunch by Christmas, then paid media is the place to start. But for everything else, I would say owned is the place to start. And it's really like, spend some time on that. If you want to create, to your point, if you're going to create a podcast, spend some time on that and get it right. And, get the host conversation down right and get the guests right and go through some iterations before you start to promote it with the other media types. If you're going to be doing blogging, then get it right? And do those, like, test and iterate for a little bit before you use the other media types to get it out there. But build your social or your owned media assets first so that then you can use the other media types appropriately.
I love what you said there about test and iterate, because I think people overlook the fact that when you're doing owned media, when you're doing owned content, you have the luxury of trying things out.
You do.
And
the nice thing about the internet.
Yeah. And, slaving over stuff before you get it right. But it's interesting, look, I've been around for a while. I remember not too long ago when a certain David Meerman Scott was talking about, building your own, like how important it was to build your website, and then, newsjacking and all this kind of ecosystem he was describing, new rules. And then that seemed to have fallen out of vogue with the advent of social, right? And social comes around, especially LinkedIn. And then for a long time, people were saying, why bother building a website? You don't need a website anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Right? What's that? And I think recently it's absolutely come full circle, and rightly so. And especially because AI is crawling all these owned properties and getting a lot of information from your owned properties. But there's a renaissance in some ways, I think, of websites, of owned properties, of owned content. Part of it's for SEO, part of it's for AI. But I also think there's been an attitude change in that it used to be you build a website and it had to be a destination. You're measuring traffic on the website like crazy. Now we take all that with a grain of salt. I mean, obviously it depends on your business. If you're an e-commerce site, if you're a direct-to-consumer site, you need that traffic.
Yep.
But, if you're putting thought leadership up there, or if you're a B2B company or, an organization, if that's where the transaction takes place, then you definitely need a lot more foot traffic. But the value of the owned is not necessarily in the traffic. That was a big aha.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, because Google and ChatGPT are no longer sending traffic to your website. So you have to figure something else out, right? And we've had to, for sure, iterate. I also think people got burned. People invested in Vine, people invested in Google+, people invested in Clubhouse, and all of those went, like, literally overnight, went dead, and people lost their content. They lost their followings. They lost their audiences. And so people are now finally understanding that to not go through that crisis and to own your audience, you should have it on something that you own, that you can control.
Yeah, and that brings us back to community in some ways, or in every way, really, because the people who come to your website or to your property and stay there and hang around and sign up for your emails. And like, if you have a community, like some platform or conversation for interaction, if you're that kind of an organization, they'll stay there, they'll go there, and then they're yours.
Yep.
So building community seems to be the probably the ultimate goal now, rather than kind of spreading everything out and chasing down audiences that might or might not be affinity audiences.
I mean, I think it's always been the goal is to build your brand loyalists and give them the tools they need to help tell your story. I think that's always been the goal. It's just the tools have changed. Yeah.
That's another one of those things that come full circle.
Yeah.
People talk about community, and our friend Mark Schaefer is always a big proponent of community, and community is the future of marketing. He said before, it's I don't doubt that. There are so many communities, and I think comms PR has they're all, let me just back up. They're always talking about it. Like they mean like marketing people are always talking about it from, the future of marketing is community. And that's where marketers need to go. But I actually think that comms is the place to make those relationships and to build those communities and to make relationships with people that matter. More than anything else, we have a huge role to play in that. And PESO is, I believe, the key to that. Prove me wrong.
I think I kind of look at it this way. Communicators are by trade relationship builders. We're messengers. We build the trust and we build the authority. And marketers by trade are features and benefits, products, like here's why you should care kinds of things about our product or service. They work together, but from my perspective, marketing doesn't build the relationships with people to then buy the product.
Yeah.
Communications builds the relationships with people, and then marketing explains the features and benefits and why they should buy. Yeah. So it's really, they work together in a really seamless way, but they still have their own fiefdoms, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, different organizations, kind of smaller organizations might have a blurry line or might have just one department to do it, which is great.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. And I don't know, all of this stuff is changing so rapidly, and
it's so fast.
It's nuts. So, which is my way of sort of asking you or diving in a little bit more to some of the more recent ways that you're evolving the model and also what you're seeing out there, because you have been really, really active in the AI and comms space. So much so, I think that sometimes when I'm ready to kind of talk about something or write something, you beat me to it. I don't know, 9 times out of 10. Shit, that's exactly what I wanted to say. So like, we're surfing the same waves and it's really great. But you're seeing a lot of it from a different perspective, and you're seeing the way that your clients are using or adapting to AI or objecting to AI. You're hearing a lot more from your large audience about it and from your own community. I should have mentioned there's a great SpinSex community, by the way. But from within the community, people talk about it. So let's look at AI and PESO, or AI and comms. Maybe it's the same thing. First of all, like top line, what are you seeing as the main kind of areas that AI is infiltrating, or that we should be enhancing or adapting, to enhance our ability to be communicators?
AI is giving us time. It's giving us more time in our day. It's making us more productive. And so when we refreshed the model in January, really we were only looking at AI from an owned media perspective. And I think that has massively changed this year. We're going to refresh again in January of 2025, which is crazy because we used to go 2 or 3 years between refreshes, and now we're having to do it like every 6 months. But that's one of the big changes that we'll make in January, which is it now infiltrates the entire model. And a lot of the work that you do through the framework to be able to integrate and ensure that you're creating measurable work can be done by AI.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's data collection, sometimes it's data analysis, sometimes it's drafting outlines of content, sometimes it's giving you ideas for social media posts, sometimes it's looking at your creative and saying, what about this? And one of my favorite things to do is, I mentioned that I'm writing the second edition of Spin Sucks. And so I put all of the content from the first book into a Claude project. I put the table of contents in there. And then as I'm writing, I put the chapters in, and I will say to it, okay, I just finished chapter 3. Here it is. Please look at the table of contents. Please read chapters 1 and 2 and tell me what I'm missing or if anything's confusing.
Love it.
And it gives me it always compliments me. It's always like, this is a really right. And then it says, here are 4 or 5 things that I think you should add. And most of the time they're pretty good suggestions, so it's like having an editor sitting next to you who can give you instantaneous comments, and then you do it, and then you go back and say, okay, I've incorporated this. What do you think? And it'll be like, well, this transition is kind of wonky, or do you want me to, I think it's making it a much better book. And the same thing, we're doing the same thing right now with subject matter experts. Well, we use leaps to interview them. So we ask them questions, we get the answers back, and then we take the answers and we draft some content, and then we throw the answers that the SME gave us and the content into ChatGPT and say, did we incorporate their answers well? And sometimes it'll say, well, you forgot this, or, they phrased it this way, but you changed the wording. And it gives you all of that in seconds. So it's giving you more time. It's making you more efficient.
Yeah, it's certainly taking on a lot of those tasks and giving you a team where you didn't have a team before, giving you all these kind of expanded capabilities. I'm a little bit not suspicious. That's not the word, but I feel like our tendency is to fill space. So, as we free up time, that time's going to get filled very quickly.
For sure.
So it's not like it's giving you time to take a vacation. It's giving you time to do more stuff.
More stuff. Yeah.
Like write your book faster,
write your book faster. It's like for every single one of our clients, we have the popcorn list that we call it. Because I had a boss early in my career who loved Faith popcorn, and she would say, "Okay, everybody, put your ideas on the popcorn list." And so it stuck. But the popcorn list is all the stuff we'd love to get to eventually, but just haven't had the time, or strategy has changed or whatever. And so we can go back to the popcorn list and say to clients, hey, we talked about doing this. What do you think about incorporating it now? Because we have the time.
Yeah. That's a very positive effect, certainly, of AI. And I'm quite positive about it and bullish on it. When you look at the PESO model, you said that it's infiltrating everywhere, and you kind of ran through a few examples. But do you have any real specifics for each of the quadrants or each of the PESO where there's a specific AI tool that's useful or that you've used, or if there's any specific use cases around that? If you can discuss a few of them, that would be awesome. We'd like to have a lot of big takeaways in the show.
Oh man. So the answer to that is it depends.
Yeah,
of course. What I have learned in the last year is that lots and lots of organizations are not allowing teams to use certain things. So they might be able to use ChatGPT, or they might be able to use Jasper, or they might be able to use Claude, but they can't use it all in tandem. So with those things as the caveat, as you know, I love Notebook LM for taking a podcast interview and creating different assets from it.
Yeah.
So I love it for that. But also we do a lot of online courses. And so I'll throw our scripts into Notebook LM, and I'll ask it to do frequently asked questions. And I'll also ask it to create assessment questions, so quiz questions. So it does that really well. I personally love Claude. My two go-to every day is Claude plus ChatGPT, just because I do a lot of content creation. So those two are my favorite. I love Waldo at the beginning of programs because you can use it for research and competitive analysis on things. It's also really great for just understanding an industry really well. So research from that perspective. I love Otter, of course, for meeting notes. What else do I use? Those are probably the big ones. I have a couple of friends who really like Jasper over Claude. So I think it just depends on what you're.
Yeah. I mean, Jasper has its own LLM, right? Writer has its own LLM. I think Jasper's using. I don't know if it has. Does Jasper have its own proprietary LLM? I don't know.
I don't remember.
Good question. Writer has its own, or it's based on. Is it Mistral? I forget. Anyway, Writer is not based on OpenAI. It's based on something else, and it has different it's almost like pre-made prompts and use cases, which is really useful. I'm with you on Claude and ChatGPT. Yeah, ChatGPT it's just so broad, and they keep adding these wonderful features. Some not so great that go away, but they're going to keep experimenting. But I work with both of them. I love Claude projects, just like you mentioned that earlier.
Love.
And Notebook LM has just wowed me. with a new capability that I didn't have. Like I don't think
Right.
it writes particularly well.
Right.
But you mentioned, like taking a podcast and pulling out, like doing a lesson about it from Notebook LM, like generating Q&A. When Notebook LM came out, and this because you were the recipient / victim of this from my standpoint. But I saw it. I was like, oh, I can build a PESO notebook, and I immediately told you about it. I sent you the information, but I took the liberty before the show, like of checking out my PESO notebook and getting a little bit more, just refreshing myself a little bit on it. It was really useful for that because I have.
I'm sure, yeah, it's great.
And for our listeners, all I did was, you can add, if you're not familiar with Notebook LM, you basically create a walled garden that becomes your own little research database / language model. And into that walled garden, it allows you to add up to 50 sources. The sources are various types. It's all in there. And they can be fairly large. The context window, or the amount that we can include, the amount of data that can be included, is massive on Notebook LM. So I took like 21 or 22 of Gini's own website pages. It's all like spinsucks.com, this. And I just, some of it's like the guide to PESO model, some of it's the overview. And I had to do a study guide just before come on. So Gini, what is the relationship between paid media and owned media within the model framework? It has questions and answers. So funny.
Oh, it has answers too. Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
Gini Dietrich emphasizes that content should live on something you own. What does she mean by this, and why is it important? So you're getting these great questions. And by the way,
I'm glad I'm consistent.
Oh yeah, but by the way, it's so funny. And in fact, every time you generate one, there's a new list. But this is a study. This is a quiz from the study guide. It's a study guide. And why is maybe you can answer this one, Gini. Why is the order of the media types in the PESO acronym significant, even if it may not reflect the order of implementation? I'm sensing a hallucination here, but
it's not significant. It's only created that way because it's easy to remember.
Well, I think you're wrong. It says, while some argue for prioritizing other media types first, the PESO acronym representing paid, earned, shared, and owned media is designed for memorability. This reflects a key branding principle. A catchy and easily remembered name contributes to its effectiveness and wider adoption. So,
need to remember.
See, there you go. But it's very interesting. It pulls out all this information. So I love Notebook LM. I do use it for a lot of content that I create to give me a baseline. And I find it really good for the owned part for sure, like for building out my own content. The part where I am not as, I think, maybe as deep in is in the paid side, right?
Yeah.
So what are the tools out there? Like, I understand conceptually, and I have done analysis of I'll get traffic data, and I'll get pricing, or I'll get advertising data, whatever, and I can drop it into any of the AI tools and get some analyses and highlight where, like, either opportunities or flaws in the programs. But are you seeing any great uses for it in the paid side, apart from like ad generation?
That's probably the big one. I know my team will use it to throw creative in to see if there are any challenges with it, like anything that our biases might prevent us from seeing. So they use it for that a lot. They use it for headline generation, just to see if it will come up with anything that they haven't thought of yet. I think they do sometimes use it just to say, hey, what kind of graphic would you use for this? They do get those kinds of ideas too. But I think those are probably the three main ways they use it.
I love the idea of synthetic data, like essentially creating personas as focus, and then building a focus group of those personas, and then testing your ideas against those, and whether that falls under the P or the kind of precursor to creating owned content or whatever. It's think up to you, but it's amazing though. The point is that all that AI is changing everything.
So cool.
It's embedding itself into into the model. I just, I think that there's just so much to get into with this. And if you had to I think a lot of people are probably, AI, I wouldn't say people are all AI advanced, but they're listening for some hints and for some clues. And you gave a couple of good tools here: ChatGPT, Claude, Waldo, Otter. By the way, I am a Fireflies AI, not an Otter person.
Okay.
But just by happenstance, not by necessarily preference. They're both great tools. But I wanted to ask you, I suppose, if there's three things that people should be doing right now in the communications world, especially with AI and the PESO model, it's all intertwined, all interconnected, right? What are those three things?
I would say it's really use it, just play with it and get comfortable with it, because the more you use it, the more you understand its value. And as you do that, consider it an intern. So just like you have to do with an intern, you have to educate, you have to, say, this isn't quite right and here's why. Do that with your AI tool of choice, because it will get better and better and better. You mentioned earlier that there's a couple of words that you don't want your AI using. Mine is impact. Please do not use the word impact. So you can train it to do those kinds of things. And one of the things I've noticed, I have to consistently tell it to write in narrative prose because it loves to give me lists. I don't want a freaking list.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Claude projects for that, by the way, because when you create a Claude project, you set the writing style, you set the tone, you set some prompts ahead. That's beautiful. Well, look, we're really kind of getting up on it, and I know that I'm so grateful for your time, Jimmy. You're so generous, given that you are, as I said, a PR legend, and I tried to refrain as much from gushing over you, but I might have failed. Look, the last thing I'm going to ask you is basically one last two-parter. First is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? And the second is, is there anything keeping you up at night, in a good way or bad way, about the future of communications?
Oh, well, there is something keeping me up at night, but I don't know if it's about the future of communications. It's how much protein can I get into my body to grow muscles? Oh,
yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. You can ask Chad. You can ask Chad.
Think about.
Well, you can ask Perplexity now. There's Perplexity now has expanded its capabilities, and there's now Perplexity shopping. So you can use Perplexity to do an intense search about the science behind muscular growth, and then at the same time find the exact protein powders you need. Wonderful.
What I have right here.
Trap.
Protein powder.
Yeah. So health is on your mind. It's a good thing.
Health, yeah. Growing muscles.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's less about the future of communications and more about how to continue to evolve this so it makes sense for every type of organization, every size of organization, and especially coming up to the first of the year, which is when we're going to relaunch all of this stuff. That's where I'm spending a lot of time. So it's kind of looking into the crystal ball a little bit to understand what could be coming.
Yeah.
Reading the research and understanding. I'd love to see Gallup do a second poll on where the media trust is right now, post-election. But it's that kind of stuff. How is this going to evolve? What are the trends? What are the economic trends showing us that will shift a lot of what we're doing, and what can we expect?
Big questions, for which, of course, I have no answers right now. But I think everything's I agree with you on everything's evolving so quickly. I mean, I'm very curious to see if there's going to be a PESO agent created. Some agentic AI is coming down very quickly, folks. And if there ever was a really good use case for an agent, could be a PESO one. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Might be something.
I'm thinking if you were a public company, I would be doing something with my money. So anyway, I think that we have a lot to chew on here. I think everybody needs to go out and go to spinsucks.com, where you will find information not only about Gini, but also about the PESO model. You can find Gini on LinkedIn, of course, Gini Dietrich, and her name will be spelled properly in the episode and notes and title of the show. Also, you go at Spin Sucks on Twitter. Gini, are you active on Twitter these days yourself too?
No.
Yeah, that's the typical answer. It's usually a sigh followed by a.
It was so great. Just is not anymore.
It all depends on what you're looking for, and it's one of those 12 media bubbles you were talking about before, which clearly means it's probably not your bubble.
That is not my bubble.
But still, if you're interested in seeing some of the distributed content from Spin Sucks, you could follow on LinkedIn, on Twitter at Spin Sucks. And is there any other place that people can find you, Gini, that I missed?
Well, I just today got a Blue Sky account. I haven't done anything with it yet. So, but
okay.
Instagram, we're on Instagram too. So
Spin Sucks, Instagram, yep. Everywhere Spin Sucks. Spin does suck everywhere. It's true.
Yep, Spin sucks.
No
everywhere.
spin. Stay clear of the spin. Well, on that note, Gini, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you can come back again. And I'm really looking forward to the next edition of the PESO Model.
Got to get it done.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time to listen in on today's conversation. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe through the podcast player of your choice, share with your friends and colleagues, and leave me a review. 5 stars would be preferred, but it's up to you. Do you have ideas for future guests or you want to be on the show? Let me know at dan@trendingcommunicator.com. Thanks again for listening to The Trending Communicator.